All right, cool. So yeah, how's it going down there in Cincinnati area?
There's so many things going on. It's wild because our business plan has just drastically changed. So it's crazy. We got out of ministry, closed 18 years of ministry, and was doing the Cicerone program because I wanted to be my own expert in the brewery.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, we've done a complete shift. Jennifer's working on my wife is working on her certified beer server,
Mm-hmm.
and we're already helping breweries in the area with service. We're helping with, we do Beer 101, we do kind of public events, we do club events. So it's really gone a different direction, but it's been really cool and exciting.
Killer. All right. Well,
Yeah,
let me just
this
do,
is all your fault.
I can't apologize. Um, so this is certified Cicerone Paul Schultz, um, recently minted certified Cicerone in the midst of a major career change, and you were like kind of loving the beer education stuff. You
Yeah,
enrolled in the advanced Cicerone coaching program, so you're keeping on with it. But
yep,
let's get back to what you're up to. So you were making this huge career switch, and
yeah,
all this beer education and like Cicerone, education that you've been doing has
yeah.
been affecting how you're approaching it. So keep going, keep going.
Well, let me give you a little bit of history. First of all, there's this big difference. You're on the Pacific Standard, right?
That's
I'm
right.
on Eastern. So if one had any guilt about drinking before noon, they have no problem at all. So this is a double, or no, I'm sorry, a doppelbock that we made,
Nice.
and the story starts here. So I've been homebrewing for almost as long as I was in ministry. My wife picked up a Mr. Beer kit, and very shortly after that, it was all over.
That's how it
So the whole
starts.
family was brewing, and so when we were discerning a change for our lives, we definitely felt called to brew. It's one thing to enjoy homebrew and the brew you make. It's another thing when you're meddling at competitions. People are saying, "Hey, you've got something here." So we wanted to open a brewery, and then we took your class. I took your class, and as a result, my aptitude for teaching and for connecting with people
Mm-hmm.
and the work that really it's kind of inventing your own job. So what I'm doing right now, I'm specifically working with Montgomery Public House, MPH in Montgomery, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and the ownership is really intent. They have wonderful fresh beer. They're really intent on creating a community around that beer. And I think one of the things that's implicit about beer is the most important ingredient isn't the water or the hops or the yeast, is the person you're sitting across drinking the beer with. And
Totally.
that, yeah. So we're making our business model is completely shifted. We'll do in our business as we grow. We'll still brew small batches, but it'll be for your company's 10th anniversary kind of thing. It's going to be a very specific. And then we're going to just continue helping breweries and working with breweries. She's going to continue on. I'm going on with the AC, which I'm very excited about. So yeah, it's very exciting. But we're kind of riding our own path.
Yeah, I love that.
I gave the day before I passed the Cicerone, I gave a presentation at a local Rotary Club. What's a Cicerone? And
Right.
from that, people have said we need you to come in and train our staff.
Hell yeah.
So there's a huge need out there.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah. So, you're hitting on so many things about doing the Cicerone exams and getting those certifications and getting that education that I like to like kind of talk about all the time.
Yeah,
Uh, One of which is it sets you up perfectly to like right out of the gate, starting at like the certified level. It sets you up perfectly to train staff and salespeople, and also to do events. Right? It just gives you that like
yeah,
confidence to talk about
yeah,
the beer and to create events and just to create experiences for people that get them excited about beer, that create community. It's super clutch. And the other thing that it really empowers you to do, especially as you go beyond even the certified level, is, it really gives you all these tools that you need to embark on entrepreneurial projects.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned events. We've already booked for 3 festivals, local festivals.
Amazing.
It really is. The need is out there. We have so many wonderful breweries, and then we have breweries that need help and just don't know.
Right.
And they're looking for that help. They're looking for that. When I explain, say, to servers, what is your job? Is it to fulfill orders? No, it's to sell beer. It's to be that person's trusted beer advocate, right? And if servers can do that, my word, their tips go through the roof.
Totally. Yeah. No, this is... There are these very direct ways that you will make more money in the business if you do these things. Like, even as a,
Stop pouring foam down the drain. Stop pouring foam down. Stop pouring foam.
Yeah, it's funny. I think management, they see a lot of times they see beer education or continuing education as like this pure expense that they're not going to get back anything from. But the reality is, it results immediately in more sales. It results in people having better experiences. Even really simple stuff like what you're talking about there, about like if you pour beer properly and you manage your draft system properly, you're going to not waste tons of beer. Like over a year, losing an ounce every time you pour a pint adds up to like huge amounts of money. These are, the margins in the hospitality industry and in restaurants and bars are razor thin. Like you can't do that kind of stuff,
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. And when you help management and ownership see that it's not foam you're pouring down the drain, it's payroll.
Right.
All of a sudden it's like, no, okay, that makes sense. We can do something about it. So draft management was a huge part of your class. That was, when you put that out there, people are like, really? Okay. I say, no, I'm not a draft engineer or anything like that, but I know the system. I know how to fix it.
That's
basic problem.
Yeah, doing the draft tech stuff is sort of like, it's just one of those things you figure out as you actually manage a draft system. Like if I owned a bar for 6 years, so I'm pretty handy with a draft system. But until when I first took the Certified Cicerone exam, though, I had never poured a beer from a faucet in my life, from a beer faucet.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat. In fact, my previous work was mainly with wine. Boom.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, hey, wine's great too.
But so I was in the same boat. But one of the things I really appreciated about your approach is that, first of all, for people who are wondering if there is an easy way or if there's a hack, or there isn't. You got to put in the work. You got to learn your stuff. You got to know what you're doing. Having said that, over prepared me for the test. Now I took it very seriously. I worked hard at it, but your approach has us over prepared. So by the time I went in to take the written, it really wasn't a problem. I was just putting down what I knew, and the tasting was very much the same way. So awesome. I appreciated that.
Yeah,
well,
I'm stoked to hear that. I try to take people just beyond what they need to know, and I think and I've said this. This is another thing I say a lot, which is my thought is that a lot of people are going to follow their interests, right? So they're going to go beyond what they need in whatever area that they find very interesting, but maybe the draft system stuff is really boring to them or something like that. So they don't quite kill it on that front. So maybe they drop the ball on one of the essays, but that's okay because they've murdered everything else. That's kind of my theory.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I figure that's what's behind crushing it,
right?
And I don't. So you hear me when I say this. I'm not tooting my own horn, but I crushed the written and the tasting test.
No, you did.
Yeah, and it wasn't. There was not even a question.
You got an 89 on the written, right?
Yeah. And there was still stuff I wasn't sure about, or maybe this or that. But if you look back in retrospect, that's the tiny little bit. and I'm sure I missed some stupid things too. You're like,
That's how that goes. Yeah,
So
that's just how it goes. But you like really killed it though. Like you enrolled in the course in November of 2023, and then you passed the test in January.
yeah, on the 4th, and the written
Yeah.
on the 18th. Or no,
Yeah.
written on the 4th and tasting on the 18th.
I mean, that's pretty
Yeah,
quick.
it was, but again, it was. So people say, "Wow, I could do this in just 2 months." Well, that's 2 months of all of your free time.
Well, and you had a background with homebrewing, so that's hugely helpful.
It was very helpful. I will say you messed with our homebrew program too, because I can't go back and do things the way I used to now. Now that's fun, but it does. It elevates the whole approach. So I guess I wouldn't have imagined at the beginning of November I'd be where I am now at the beginning of April. With months booked out for events and months booked out for it's wonderful. I've got
Tell me
2
how.
staff. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is exciting and crazy. Like you've immediately kind of jumped into like consulting essentially and event production, which I think a lot of Cicerones are interested in. I used to have this post on my blog about how to be a beer consultant because I was doing it myself back in the day. And I used to get emails about that all the time. But I would love to hear more about like what you are. First of all, how are you finding these clients? And second of all, what are you doing for them exactly?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so it's really very organic. We've been actively tasting beers. By actively, I mean we've been on, making sure we're taking notes of all of our tastings. And in 3.5 years, I'm right at 4,000 different beers. Now, people who aren't into tasting are like, dude, that sounds like a problem. It's like, no, that's the wife and I going out every other night and sharing a couple flights and each of us having a beer, But so we've been involved, and to be honest, this first brewery, MPH, that has booked me up. It's a wonderful place, and it was a cold call, and ownership and said, "I can't, let's talk about this." And all of a sudden, we're both getting excited, talking about how we can build that community in Montgomery.
Awesome.
And it's
awesome.
been fast. Yeah.
And this is just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, just so people
Just
know.
outside, right around just north and east of Blue Ash. So it's been amazing. It started with, well, we'd love to have a beer 101. Can you do some history and some process and just share kind of how beer has come to be. Ownership showed to the first one, and we all just had a kick in time. That then translates into, well, we got to make sure we have another one. So the second one was last night. Right?
Nice.
April is full, May is full, June is full.
Amazing.
I mean, just
like
different events. Yeah.
Are you getting the crowd to show up, or is that kind of on the brewery side? Are you more showing up to do the class and letting them do the marketing, or?
They're generally doing the marketing. I share all their posts, but they're doing that work, and of course, I'll be a part of that as this continues to develop. But each time, you have people who come in who are like, "Yeah, I had a wonderful lady one time, the first time we were sharing why we're there, and she said, "Well, I'm a wine drinker. I'm a red wine drinker, but my kids love craft beer, and I want to be able to talk about it." And by the time, 90 minutes later, she was just having a great time. So
yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And there's, I love when someone shows up and says they either don't like beer or they're like more into wine or cocktails even. It's like, well, there's beers that are going to hit some of those like spots that are the things that you like, which is that sour acidic balance with sweet and sour basically.
Yeah.
That's what most like sour cocktails are, like a margarita, and that's also what wine is. So.
Well, one component of this is how to taste, how to evaluate, how to appreciate a beer. And when someone tells me they've had wines with a sommelier, I say, okay, you know what you need to know. So before you drink your wine, what do you do? Well, I look at it. Okay, then what do you do? Well, I swirl it around and I put my nose in it. It's like, okay, so
Boom.
you're in good shape. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, it's like they're already halfway there basically. You just got to learn like a slightly different language because there's just actually the beer versus wine thing. Beer just across all the styles has like way more flavor profiles and flavor potential elements and aromas. So it's wine is I'm not saying it's one dimensional, but it just doesn't have as much going on. There isn't like a range of flavors that go for wine that go all the way from like, roasty to, bready. I mean, it's just not, you know, and spicy with hops and all. There's just more ingredients, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and more processing of those ingredients, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. But it's great to see them, have a basis and then say, okay, we're going to do the same things with beer, so, I might give you some ideas of what you could smell, but I'd much rather let people get into it and say weird things like bubble gum or, some strange, and sometimes it's there. I'll
Yeah.
say, well, I've never even smelled it, but then you're like, oh, my daughter smells a beer and goes, cheddar cheese. And I'm like, what? And then you get back on it and you're like, yeah, okay.
Interesting. Maybe it's like isovaleric acid or something. See, you're
Yeah,
gonna
right.
as you start doing all these tastings with the advanced coaching group,
Yeah,
you'll see, sometimes when the group is sitting there coming up with all their evocative descriptors during the tasting, it's like you'll sort of follow this pathway where like someone will have a descriptor that seems a little like weird or different, and then after you kind of talk about it, and you'll find that they're just kind of experiencing a certain compound in a slightly different way that everyone agrees is there, and
yeah,
that kind of stuff is super fun. I mean, that's how you learn, is by sitting around with like other people who are talented who've been practicing, and you just discuss this stuff, and yeah, it's
for
super
sure.
fun. So that's exciting, dude. What a
Yeah.
cool path.
Well, and again, one we weren't intending on, but as things start just dropping into place, it's like, well, okay. So, and they have. So I'm getting ready to, I crushed the BJCP written.
Oh, nice.
And much of it's because I was prepared through your course. I mean, there's a load of crossover there.
Yeah,
So,
huge.
yeah, and I'm getting ready to take my judging exam on the 13th of April. I, I got a craft brewing certificate through Cornell.
Oh, wow.
All of these things kind of dropped into place, and I've picked up different things from each one, but overall, it's all really reinforced what we went through.
That's awesome. That's very cool. I know that there are all these great courses out there like Cornell, Siebel,
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna straight up say this. Like, for what you will learn, my program is a screaming deal, I think.
Oh, with without a okay. So let me say, as a person who's pursued those other things, absolutely.
Yeah.
And not only was I glad to purchase the Cicerone program. I mean, I haven't lost anything.
Yeah, yeah.
But you've
No.
taken that cost off of my AC, and I mean that was a huge deal. So I mean, at this point, I'm thrilled.
Yeah, and I don't want these interviews, these like Meet a Cicerone podcasts, to be just like ads for my courses. But obviously, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah,
Just at least a little bit. And what I will say is, I know people who have gone to Siebel, spent like a whole week in Chicago, paid like thousands and thousands of dollars for courses, and then come back, like people who were enrolled in my AC program, and come back and been like, holy shit, I just spent like double what your whole program costs, and I didn't learn even
yeah,
1/30th of what I've been learning in this class. So
yeah.
just throwing that out
Well,
there.
and I assume the AC is going to be like the Cicerone. I mean, the information's there, but you've got to take the opportunity. You've got to do the work. You've got to do
Yeah.
the reading. You've got to For me, it was watching every lecture and writing every note down and reviewing those notes, rewriting them out. But again, the result is I had it pretty solid by the time we were done.
Yeah. No, you leveled up really quick. And, we talked about this, but I'll just say it for the benefit of folks who are listening. But yeah, like my certified level course is a series of video lessons, a bunch of them, a lot of material, covers everything on the exam. But when you get to the AC level, it's more of a reading list where I'm just like, we can't possibly teach you all of this, right? Now you're getting like a grad degree. So you have to do all this work, and then we will do a weekly get together with you and the rest of the cohort to talk about that material and to talk about how to beat the exam and to practice, your technical panel and your orals and all these things, so that there's just like no surprises on the exam. But yeah, that's a 6-month process of weekly meetings, and then people usually take a few more months to like do their final ramp up, take all the practice exams, and but hey, it seems like a big commitment, and it certainly is. And people doing the math will be like, oh, this looks expensive and this and that. But, I know people who have taken the advanced exam, which, by the way, has a less than a 10% pass rate. And I know people who have taken it like 3 times over multiple years and just failed. And it's like, just enroll in my program, man. That's save time and money. Anyway, that's like
for sure
an ad. We'll move on from that. I'm excited for you. It sounds really cool that you found this new path, and so what else? What are you thinking for like kind of long term?
Yeah, so long term, first of all, the brewing industry, it's not gonna shrink. You'll have some closed, you'll have some open, but people ask me if there's a bubble to craft brewing, and there really isn't. All we're doing is going back to drinking beer the way we have always drunk beer as a society, with the exception of this industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Right.
All of a sudden, we're doing local fresh beer again, just like we always used to. That being the case, there is always going to be a clientele for this kind of work. There are going to be people gathering around beer. There are going to be beer professionals who need training. There are going to be brewers who need someone to bounce ideas off of, or to stay current about what's happening in the industry. I don't think that's ever going to go away.
I agree with you 100%. I think people are kind of down on craft beer at the moment because people who've been in doing it and been in the scene for like a decade or whatever, or even 5 years, I guess. It's like you've seen in a completely immature industry have like a huge explosion of growth and then kind of plateau and maybe even take a tiny dip. And it's like that just, we've just reached maturity. We can obviously not have you can't have double digit growth every year for like, decade after decade after decade. It's like this, there are tons of jobs out there for people who want to do this stuff. If you're into this community and you're into beer, you can, it might not be the crazy upward momentum that we had 5 years ago, but it's still a huge industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people. Yeah, tons of opportunity.
Perspective is everything. You might have a load of microbreweries or craft breweries around, and if you have good beer, that's great. That's kind of like level one. What if then you dedicated yourself, instead of trivia on a Tuesday, not that that's a problem, what if we dedicated ourselves to being the premier beer service place in the city? Now all of a sudden that's a totally different level, right? Mm-hmm. You can have great beer, and if you're throwing it down a crappy system, you're going to have crappy beer. And there are people who still don't get that. So there's always room for someone to come up and get their market share.
Right. And for what you're doing, your potential customer base for this kind of consulting or training or event stuff is not just breweries, right? I mean, you can do, any bar, tap room, even restaurants.
Yeah, in fact, this one I told you about that came about from a Rotary meeting, local Rotary presentation. The fella has 5 locations, and he wants his staff trained on beer.
Oh, amazing.
So we've got a date in May. So it's like he's bringing in all the staff from all his locations, and we're going to do training.
Killer. How many hours are you going to spend?
The initial one's going to be about an hour and a half, and then we're going to set up as we determine what their needs are and what they would really like and need to work on. We're going to set up subsequent events so that we're building kind of a culture of good service.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. When I did stuff like that, I usually, I would focus on service, of course, and pouring and clean glassware and stuff like that. But also, then I would usually go into using like the beer that they have, the exact beers that they're selling. I would taste everything along with them and give them like these kind of top line descriptors for these beers. Maybe a little bit of history, just something they can talk to their customers about to get them excited about it.
Yeah. We had, it's funny you said that my wife and I were out maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we hadn't been in this brewery for a while. And I walked up and said, well, no one else is in the place. Hey, what's new on tap? He goes, well, I don't know when you were in last. Oh, okay. We'll give you a pass on that. I said, well, what was the last thing you put on tap? He goes, here's the beer list.
Oh, my God.
Now, luckily, one of the owners was at the bar, and he started engaging me right away. Yeah. But even things like that, no one else going around, talk to me.
Huge
You're trying to sell me beer here. And so simple things like that. Well, I don't know when you were in. Right. But you know about your beer, right? Well, and if you don't know about the beer, then that's a problem. Yeah.
No. And so that's like, yeah. I mean, that sounds like an attitude issue.
Well, it's easy to get. It's, sometimes younger people have a difficulty making that connection. But if you can do that, you can train some things to do that. And again, to your point of descriptions, they say, well, tell me about the triple. And the person says, I don't really like beer. And it's like,
right.
Okay, tell me about the triple. Right. I don't want to know if yeah, right. Oh, I don't like that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's nothing that is more immediately revealing about how kind of poor the culture of a business is if you get that kind of answer. It really just speaks to, it really is about training. It's just that kind of stuff should never happen. Everyone there should be armed with some very basic level descriptors and stuff. Whenever you put a new beer on draft, there should be, ideally you have a certified Cicerone on staff or someone like that who can just kind of write down a couple tasting notes for the rest of the staff, or even taste it with whoever's at the bar at that moment and say, like, here's some stuff you can talk to customers about when it comes to this beer. And then hopefully that person will kind of spread the word a little bit about that, or other bartenders or servers will hear you talking about the beer to customers and then start repeating what you say, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I owned a bar in San Francisco for 6 years called Old Devil Moon. And, so this stuff was really important to me. And obviously I did training there, as did my partners, both of whom were certified Cicerones. And at one point we had 4 certified Cicerones and 1 advanced me behind the bar there. So I think, that was pretty epic. It was an amazing tap list with a staff where you could ask them anything. That's more than, that's like spectacular and unusual. But just having at least one person on staff, every brewery should have at least one certified Cicerone, or every tap room.
Yep, absolutely. And I am seeing that. So we just finished up in January. By March, we're already booking. There's the need is definitely out there. It's organic, but people will see a presentation, then they're like, hey, this is important. So in the first one, we had a brewer who'd been a long-time home brewer, and we were talking about water profiles. He says, well, I always RO my water. And I said, well, that's a great start. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, we can replicate any water profile from anywhere in your brewery for some inexpensive ingredients and a little bit of math. And he was just like, really? Yeah, we can do that. That's something you. And so now he's gone. No, he wanted to talk for 20, 30 minutes about water. This was
Amazing.
hilarious. Yeah.
Which is like the most complicated, thing when it comes to the ingredients. That's like the water chemistry stuff is the most brutal.
Yeah.
Even at the advanced Cicerone level, they barely test you on water chemistry.
Good to know.
Yeah. There's I'm sure you're familiar with those 4 ingredient books, water, yeast, hops, and malt. And luckily, you don't need to read a ton of water until you get to like master level. Yeah.
Nice.
The other 3 are quite important, but water, luckily, I'm looking at my shelf of books over here. Yeah, that water one is brutal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so it was interesting as we're going through ingredients, and he's like, hey, can we go back to water? And it's like, sure. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a trip. Yeah, I mean, and you make this great point, or allude to this great point right there, which is in the craft beer world, there are these like superhero brewers that everyone knows about, like Vinny Salurzo from Russian River, and I don't know, Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada, whatever. All these, there are these superstars and these like old gods of the scene. But the reality is, not everybody knows all that high level stuff.
Right.
Even people who are brewing professionally.
Yeah.
One thing that you will learn as you're moving through the Cicerone levels, one thing you will see is that some of the coolest jobs out there are these ones where you get to utilize your technical knowledge and your kind of those descriptive skills and those event skills and that the sensory skills and educational skills, and kind of bridge the gap between like the production side and the sales side.
Yeah, absolutely. Already seeing some of that. And you can have some wonderful brewers. I mean, MPH has some incredible, this is another ad, some of the freshest beer, and they're really pursuing styles, Belgians and Saisons, and you see a lot of these wonderful things coming around. People are getting rid of their blending beers, and there's a
Nice.
point, I think, where every brewer can kind of get into a rut I have in my home brewing, and to just talk with someone else or to bounce another idea off, and it's amazing how that goes. So, but I can't complain about the beer. It's delicious.
That's awesome. Well, my sister lives in Cincinnati, so it's pretty likely that we'll meet in person at some point over the next year, because I go there a couple times a year if I can. So maybe we'll have to head out there to MPH and have a beer.
Yeah, I'll give you a beer 101, Chris. How about
I love it. I'm in. This is really good stuff. And I think, one thing I'm trying to do with these interviews is keep them tight. I don't think the beer scene needs another like 3-hour drunken long form podcast.
I only have the one beer, so I'm on a limited time anyway.
Yeah, I feel you. But I just feel like that was really a lot of good information. I think inspiring also. I think a lot of people who want to do the Cicerone stuff want to kind of do the stuff you're doing,
Well, I didn't know that I did, but I'm loving it. And it would be great if, as we're going through the AC together, and I think that'd be a neat thing to kind of check back, and I can tell you what's happening or what has changed, and I'm sure stuff will. So.
Oh, 100%. We're gonna do a second chat when you're at the end of that process and see where you have ended up, because you think about how fast your idea about what you wanted to do just changed over the last like 6 months, and imagine where you're going to be a year from now.
Right, exactly. And at that point, we'll have not only the knowledge that we're building, but already loads of experience, which is also going to inform us as we go.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, very cool. I'm excited to get back out there to Ohio, have a beer with you in person. But until then, I will see you in the Beer Scholar Advanced Cicerone Coaching Program community.
Yeah, sounds good, man. I'm loving it.
Yeah, awesome, Paul. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.
You too. Have a good day.